Hi everyone, my name is Paulina and let's talk about bimbos and especially Slavic bimbos. Slavic bimbo aesthetic officially became one of the Pinterest and TikTok cores. But did you know that is not the first time when the West pays attention to the Slavic culture and especially its women? Let's talk about this a little bit more. I'm gonna say in advance that I don't want to put any negative associations to this aesthetic. In this video, I have a different goal. We're gonna look at the Russian bimbo trend as a concept, and if we're using the terminology of Yuri Stepanov, the Russian famous linguist, the concept is the cloud of culture. This cloud of culture that has lots of layers, a lot of associations, and through history it was developed, and I'm gonna see what are the social phenomena that are connected with this trend. And unfortunately, they're not very positive and kind of disturbing. So if you didn't know what bimbo nowadays means. The site Aesthetic Wiki describes bimbo core as a very ultra-feminine aesthetic that is centered around pink, glitter, all 2000s photos, and hyperpop. Some films that are associated with this culture are Legally Blonde, Jennifer's Body, and famous people who had their bimbo era are Kim Kardashian, Paris Hilton, Pamela Anderson. Some of the aesthetic of bimbo was used by Nicki Minaj, Cindy Sweeney. Nowadays, actually, there are no strict rules of how you can be bimbo. You can be whatever you want. It's all about the feminism, sexual freedom, and how you want to dress, how you want to express yourself. But if we look a little bit later in the time, what bimbo actually meant. The word bimbo appeared in the 20th century, and actually at first it was used to describe men, but then later in the 1920s people started using it for women, and actually till the 21st century this term was connected with the dumb blonde stereotype. Unfortunately, even in our century, bimbo girls were not perceived as very smart. By the Urban Dictionary, the bimbo is the girl who is very attractive, who is empty-headed, and willingly she's a sex object. That says that nowadays a lot of people can still perceive bimbos like that, especially in older generations. As I said earlier, there are different types of bimbos. There is also hashtag winter bimbo. Those are the girls who are dressing in very fabulous looking winter clothes, which are not always very practical, but they're aesthetic, they're hot, and they're sexy. What I'm saying is that this bimbo core, this winter bimbo core, is very close to the Slavic bimbo trend that we're seeing right now. And if you probably heard the song Moj Marmeladny by Katja Lel, you know this trend. Girls are doing their makeup that is supposed to be Slavic. They're dressing in very nice, fabulous fur coats, fur hats, and that is kind of considered Slavic bimbos. It's very nice, it's stereotypical also, but nice and kind of funny. I love that. It's nice that TikTok and all of the social media kind of led us to appreciate cultures of other countries. But this trend of Slavic bimbo aesthetic was not the only trend that happened in 2023 that was connected with Slavic culture, with Eastern European culture. So what's interesting is that in this year, 2023, the TikTok and internet community started paying more attention to Slavic aesthetic, to Eastern European culture, and especially the post-Soviet period. People romanticized the symbols of the crises that were in 19s and the early 2000s, and that is kind of nice and funny from some perspective, because my parents, for example, and my grandparents, people who lived through these years and were very adults, a lot of them hate this time because that was very difficult. That was very poor times for the countries, for the post-Soviet countries, because the Soviet Union collapsed. There were a biggest inflation. People had to learn how to survive, how to find money. A lot of families, they didn't get paid for a month. So that was a very, very difficult time. But right now, nowadays, the symbols of this time are kind of romanticized. And that is also nice. I don't see nothing bad and terrible about that. The TikTok time, the TikTok generation is not the only time when Russian aesthetic and Slavic aesthetic in general appeared very popular to the broader audience. Since the 1980s, and especially after the collapse of USSR in 1999, the Iron Curtain that was dividing the Slavic and Western world finally opened. And naturally, people from both sides were really curious to know what's going on overseas. The Western world really increased its interest to the people in post-Soviet countries, and especially to its women. There are three phenomena that are kind of connected with this. The first one is models. So in the 2000s, there happened what's called a Russian wave in modeling industry, and a lot of models from Russia started appearing in very famous runway shows. For example, are models like Natalia Vadyanova, Vlada Roslykova, Natalia Poli, and others. They started appearing very much in the fashion world, in the Western fashion world. They came from very poor families, from very poor conditions. For example, Natalia Vadyanova, she had to quit school at the age of 16 and start working in the bazaar to sell fruits and vegetables.
I was very poor girl selling fruits on the street. It's true, and I know trying to survive. That's what I was doing. Then suddenly somebody came and said, "Oh, maybe you want to go to Paris," and it's quite shocking when you are a Russian girl living in your town and think that you will stay there forever. In 3 months I was in Paris and doing stuff I couldn't possibly imagine I would do.
Now we're going to talk about another phenomenon. I don't know if it's linked with this increased interest to Slavic girls in modeling industry, but there was a thing called Russian brides. Before we go further, let's type in the internet, what are the characteristics of Russian women? There are a lot of sites, they describe like stereotypical features that Russian women had. Let's read some of them. One very kind of popular trait is that they're traditional, they're gonna respect the family, they're gonna want children, and they're beautiful, they're incredibly beautiful. There is a stereotype that in Russia there are just a lot of girls that look like models but live in a very poor conditions. They're very stylish, they want to dress very beautifully, they want to dress in high heels, they want to wear tights even though it's freaking cold outside. They want to do everything to make their men proud that they date her. And another feature is that they're open-minded. So if you are a man from a different culture, a different background, she's gonna accept you, whatever you are. Also, they're smart, they read a lot, they know a lot of languages, and she can easily learn your language. Those kind of characteristics are really like selling you a Russian woman, a Russian vibe. So if we look a little bit closer to this website, we can see this is kind of like a dating matrimonial agency that helps you to find yourself a nice vibe. In the introduction to this article is that, you know, nowadays Western women are so self-oriented. It's difficult for a normal guy to find themselves a nice woman who will love them, who will accept them, who will not compete with them no matter what. And that's why you need yourself a perfect Russian bride. And when they say Russian, they mean, as I assume, Slavic, because this site, they provide you the choices for women in different countries, like in Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, Poland, Bulgaria, and others. And they talk about like Russian when they mean Slavic. And a lot of these matrimonial agencies, they provide you the pros and cons of these women. And one of the cons are that they're mercantile, that they want your money. They just grow up in this mentality that you need to marry a foreign man who will pay for you.
Now let's get down to business, shall we? You want to find a beautiful Russian bride to take back to America, eh?
That's why I'm here.
Yes, and you've narrowed down your selection to 2 women from our online database? Are you ready to meet them in person before you make your final choice?
Yes, please, I am so ready.
All right. Katya, Svetlana!
Of course, I do feel really judgmental, really negative about all of this Russian bride phenomenon. But let's be critical. If there is a demand on this type of thing, there gotta be a supply. And if we return to the late 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, there was a big, terrible crisis. And of course, some women were choosing to sell their body, to sell sexual services to get some money. If we look at the culture, there appeared in 1989 the film called Interdevочка or Intergirl by Pyotr Todorovsky. That was a movie based on a book about the girl, a woman who worked in the daily life as a hospital worker, and at weekends, at nights, she worked as a currency sex worker. She went to some hotels where there were different people from other countries who had money, and she paid her with currency. In this film, she married a man from Switzerland who fell in love with her, and she went with him to the Switzerland, but that didn't end well, obviously. I'm not going to spoil you anything, but this movie is about this social phenomenon that was indeed in these countries, in the Western European countries. Some women chose to live this kind of lifestyle to get money from people from foreign countries. But if we look at the numbers, in 2000, European Parliament published a paper about trafficking in women. At this time, in 1990s, almost 500,000 women were trafficked in European countries every year, and 80% of them were people from Eastern Europe. If you look at this paper, I will link it in the description actually below. They interview different women from countries, Slavic countries. There are a lot of women from Ukraine, a girl from Russia. None of them knew that they're gonna be doing sex work abroad. Of course, they had some promises. They hoped for a better life. They went from a very poor, terrible background, but that was not their choice to do this sex work. And also in this paper, they interviewed 108 people from Netherlands. They said that only 1/4 of them knew that they would have to do the sex work abroad. In this paper, they also say that one of the ways that women were brought to the Europe is by matrimonial agencies. They also say that in this time in Europe, there are a lot of tabloids that offer you best Russian brides. They offer the pictures of them, the characteristics. So that was it. At the end of this video, I want to say that I really hope I didn't ruin the aesthetic for you, because none of those events, none of those negative, very terrible things are connected directly with the aesthetic. But I also hope that I gave you some new information to analyze. It was very interesting for me to make this video. If you like this type of content, leave a like, subscribe to this channel, and write in the comments what you think about this aesthetic of Slavic bimbos and in general about this topic. Goodbye and see you in the next video.